He laughed when I placed my resignation letter on his desk, called it a joke, said I'd never have the spine to actually leave. That was yesterday morning at 9 a.m. By 9 a.m. today, his company had imploded completely. Investors fled, employees quit en masse. Federal investigators circled like vultures. The empire he spent 15 years building crumbled in less than 24 hours, and I just stood there, silent, watching from across the street with my coffee, wearing the only smile that mattered in the end. My name is Emily Carter, and for 6 years, I was the senior operations director at Redwood Dynamics, a mid-sized tech company nestled in the glass and steel heart of downtown Denver. 34 years old, single by choice, and damn good at what I do. I'd climbed from junior analyst to senior management through sheer competence and an ability to see patterns others missed. My middle-class upbringing in suburban Ohio taught me the value of hard work, but nothing prepared me for the toxic cesspool that Redwood had become. The office occupied floors 15 through 18 of a gleaming tower that caught the morning sun like a blade. From my corner office, one I'd earned through 60-hour weeks and sacrificed weekends, I could see the Rockies in the distance, their peaks a reminder that there was something permanent beyond the corporate games we played daily. The view was perhaps the only thing I'd miss. Redwood Dynamics specialized in enterprise software solutions, the kind of boring but lucrative products that kept Fortune 500 companies running. On paper, we were a success story. 300 employees, 40 million in annual revenue, and a client list that included some of the biggest names in aerospace and defense. But paper lies as easily as the men who run this place. The office itself was a study in contrasts. Sleek conference rooms with names like Innovation Hub and Synergy Suite, bordered cubicle farms where exhausted developers subsisted on energy drinks and false promises of equity. The executive floor, where I spent most of my time, reeked of expensive cologne and barely concealed contempt. Every meeting room had a glass wall, transparency, they called it, though nothing here was ever truly transparent. The culture had curdled slowly, like milk left in the sun. When I started, there was genuine excitement about our products, a sense we were building something meaningful. But as the company grew, so did the rot. The boys' club mentality crept in like fog, subtle at first, then suffocating. Female employees found their ideas credited to male colleagues. Our contributions were minimized with phrases like great support work, while men doing identical tasks were driving innovation. I watched talented women leave one by one, their exit interviews filed away and forgotten. The few of us who remained in senior positions learned to armor ourselves with data, documentation, and a practiced deafness to casual degradation. We spoke in measured tones, never too aggressive, never too emotional, walking the impossible tightrope of being heard without being labeled difficult. Mark Halstead, our CEO, had built this culture brick by brick. Harvard MBA, old Denver money, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He surrounded himself with men who looked like younger versions of himself. Same university pedigree, same country club membership, same casual cruelty dressed up as radical candor. They moved through the office like they owned not just the company, but everyone in it. The breaking point had been building for months. Every dismissed suggestion in meetings where I was the only woman. Every time my meticulously researched proposals were tabled while half-baked ideas from male VPs got greenlit immediately. Every client dinner where I was introduced as someone's assistant despite running entire divisions. The contempt was never stated outright. That would be too actionable. Instead, it lived in smirks, in talking over me mid-sentence, in forgetting to include me in critical strategy sessions. I documented everything, every slight, every stolen idea, every moment of discrimination subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. My personal laptop held folders within folders of evidence, backed up in 3 different cloud services. I knew that one day, I would need it all. Denver's morning traffic crawled below as I stood at my window that last morning. Resignation letter printed and signed in my hand. The city was waking up to another Tuesday, unaware that by Wednesday, one of its rising tech stars would be nothing but a cautionary tale. I straightened my jacket, the expensive one I'd bought to be taken seriously, and walked toward Mark's office, my heels clicking against marble floors with the rhythm of a countdown. The morning I decided to resign started like any other. Mark had called an emergency meeting at 7 a.m., his favorite power play, forcing everyone to adjust their schedules to his whims. I'd been presenting our quarterly operational efficiency report, 3 months of analysis condensed into actionable insights that could save the company $2 million annually. That's an interesting perspective, Emily. Mark interrupted halfway through my second slide, not even looking up from his phone. But I think what we really need is a more aggressive approach. Jim, why don't you take us through your thoughts? Jim Harrison, VP of Sales, hadn't even reviewed the data. I'd sent it to him 3 times. He stood up, walked to the whiteboard, and began sketching out my exact proposal, word for word, as if it had just occurred to him. The other men around the table nodded appreciatively. Mark finally looked up, engaged now, asking Jim the questions he should have asked me. Brilliant thinking, Jim, Mark said, clapping him on the shoulder. This is the kind of innovation we need. Emily, make sure you support Jim in implementing this. Support? There it was again. 6 years of leading, reduced to supporting. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up my neck, but I'd learned to transform it into something colder, more useful. I smiled, nodded, and made a note in my leather portfolio. Not about the meeting, about the date and time Mark had just stolen $2 million of value from me and handed it to Jim. The incidents piled up like snow before an avalanche. There was the client dinner where Mark introduced me to potential investors as our helper, despite my title being clearly Senior Operations Director. The conference in San Francisco where my keynote slot was mysteriously given to a male colleague who'd joined the company 3 months prior. The performance review where Mark rated me as meets expectations while praising my attention to detail, code for good secretary material. You're too sensitive, he'd said when I'd pushed back once, early in my tenure. This is how business works. If you can't handle it, maybe you're not cut out for senior management. The worst part was the gaslighting. Every slight came wrapped in plausible deniability. When I was excluded from the executive golf retreat, it was because we didn't think you played. When my name was left off the patent filing for a process I'd developed, it was an administrative oversight. When my salary increase request was denied for the 3rd year running, despite exceeding every metric, it was budget constraints. The same year, Mark bought a new Tesla and Jim got a 40% raise. 3 weeks before my resignation, I'd pitched a complete restructuring of our client service division. I'd spent nights and weekends building the framework, creating projections, getting buy-in from key stakeholders. The presentation was flawless. Mark had actually smiled. This is exactly what we need, he'd said. Let me think about it. The next Monday, an all-hands email went out announcing the exciting new restructuring initiative, led by Mark himself, with Jim as implementation lead. My name appeared nowhere. When I confronted Mark privately, he looked genuinely puzzled. I'm not sure what you're upset about, Emily. This was always the plan. You did great support work on the research, and we appreciate that. That's what being a team player means. Team player. Support work. Appreciate that. The words were carefully chosen weapons, each one designed to remind me of my place while maintaining legal safety. I walked back to my office that day with absolute clarity. I was done being their safety net, their invisible foundation, their convenient scapegoat when things went wrong, and their erased contributor when things went right. The resignation letter took me 10 minutes to write. Professional, brief, giving the standard 2 weeks' notice. I printed it on the good paper, the heavy cream stock with the subtle watermark. It felt substantial in my hands as I walked to Mark's corner office that Tuesday morning. He was on a call when I knocked, but waved me in with that dismissive gesture I'd come to despise. I waited, standing, while he finished browbeating some supplier about delivery times. Finally, he hung up and looked at me with mild irritation. What is it, Emily? I've got the board call in 20. I placed the letter on his desk, centered perfectly on his leather desk pad. My resignation, 2 weeks' notice, as per my contract. The silence lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then Mark laughed, not a chuckle, but a full, contemptuous laugh that filled the office like poison gas. Is this a joke? He picked up the letter, scanning it with theatrical disbelief. Emily, come on. What's this really about? Want more vacation days? A new title? Don't be dramatic. It's not a joke, I said quietly. He leaned back in his $8,000 chair, still smirking. You're not going anywhere. We both know that. You need this job. You need us. Where else are you going to go? Who's going to hire a? He paused, choosing his words with mock care. A support specialist with delusions of grandeur? I guess we'll find out, I said. This is a stunt, he declared, tossing the letter aside. Fine, take your little tantrum break. When you come to your senses tomorrow, we'll pretend this never happened. Now get out. I have real work to do. As I walked out of his office, I heard him laughing again, already calling Jim to share the amusing story of Emily's breakdown. He had no idea that I'd been recording our entire conversation. He had no idea about a lot of things. What Mark didn't know could fill a warehouse. What he didn't know was that for 3 years, I hadn't just been managing operations, I'd been the silent architect holding his house of cards together. Every major contract, every investor relationship, every critical system that kept Redwood running smoothly existed because I built it, maintained it, and protected it from his reckless decisions. But more importantly, what Mark didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything. It started innocently enough. After my first experience with having my ideas stolen, I began keeping detailed records, emails, meeting notes, timestamps. Protection, I told myself. Insurance. But as the patterns became clearer, my documentation evolved into something more comprehensive. I became a forensic accountant of my own company's sins. The password to the executive shared drive that Mark carelessly gave me 2 years ago, he never revoked it. The access to financial systems I needed for operational reports, far broader than anyone realized. The relationships I'd built with key clients who trusted me more than they'd ever trust Mark, those were mine alone. Late nights in the office took on new meaning. While Mark thought I was diligently working overtime, I was photographing documents, downloading files, creating an archive of Redwood's true nature. The inflated user metrics we reported to investors, I had the real numbers. The security vulnerability in our main product that we'd hidden from clients for 18 months, I had the internal emails discussing the cover-up. The sexual harassment settlements paid out quietly to 3 female employees, complete with illegal NDAs. I had copies of everything. The most damning evidence came from Mark himself. His ego made him careless. He would forward emails to me for handling without reading the full chains, exposing conversations where he discussed cooking books, avoiding regulations, and his actual opinion of our major investors. Idiots with money was a favorite phrase. He stored sensitive documents on shared servers, assuming no one would bother to look. He conducted illegal discussions on company email, believing his position made him untouchable. I organized everything meticulously. Folder after folder, chronologically arranged, cross-referenced, and backed up in multiple locations. Financial fraud in one section, safety violations in another. Employment law breaches cataloged with surgical precision. Each piece alone might be explained away, but together they painted a picture of systematic corporate malfeasance that would make any investigator salivate. The key was patience. I couldn't just dump this information randomly. It needed to be strategic, targeted, devastating. I spent weeks researching the perfect recipients. Sarah Brennan, the investigative journalist at the Denver Post who specialized in corporate fraud and had been sniffing around tech companies for months. David Park, our biggest investor, who prided himself on ethical investing and had a zero-tolerance policy for fraud. The SEC whistleblower office, where I could file a complaint that would trigger a mandatory investigation. But there was one piece of leverage more powerful than all the rest: the Garrison contract. Garrison Aerospace was our biggest client, worth $12 million annually. What Mark didn't know was that the contract wasn't with Redwood Dynamics. Not really. The relationship existed because of me. Tom Garrison's daughter had been my roommate in college. I'd brought them in, nurtured the relationship, and built the trust. The contract included a key person clause that no one had bothered to read carefully. If I left the company, Garrison had the right to terminate immediately without penalty. 3 days before my resignation, I had coffee with Tom. If I were to leave Redwood, I said carefully, hypothetically speaking, what would Garrison do? Tom studied me over his cup. Hypothetically, we'd follow you wherever you went. You're the only reason we stay. Mark's an ass, and everyone knows it. And if I went nowhere, if I just left, then we'd leave too. Find another vendor. Hypothetically, the plan crystallized that night. I would resign professionally, giving Mark his 2 weeks to mock and dismiss. But the moment he laughed at my resignation, the moment he called it a joke, the clock would start ticking. 24 hours to destroy everything he'd built on the backs of people he despised. I prepared everything in advance. Emails drafted, but not sent. Sitting in my personal account. Documents scanned and organized in a private cloud drive. A timeline precise down to the minute. I even prepared for contingencies. What if Mark accepted my resignation gracefully? What if he offered me a raise? What if he fired me on the spot? But I knew Mark. His arrogance was as predictable as gravity. He would laugh, he would mock. He would assume his power was absolute and my threat was empty. His hubris would be the match that lit the fuse. The night before my resignation, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine, looking at the Denver skyline. Somewhere in those lights was Mark, probably at his country club, laughing with his buddies about the latest hysterical woman in his office. He had no idea that I held his future in a folder labeled Redemption. I thought about Mercy. For about 30 seconds. Then I remembered every woman who'd left Redwood in tears. Every idea stolen, every career derailed. Every dream crushed under the weight of Mark's toxic kingdom. This wasn't just about me. This was about Anna from accounting, who'd been fired for performance issues after reporting sexual harassment. This was about Jennifer from development, who'd been passed over for promotion 5 times despite outperforming every metric. This was about every Emily who'd been told she was support when she was actually the foundation. The wine tasted sweeter with each sip. Tomorrow, Mark would laugh at my resignation. And then, in exactly 24 hours, I would teach him the difference between a joke and a punchline. The email took me 40 minutes to craft. Every word was deliberate, every phrase calculated to seem innocuous while planting seeds of doubt. I hit send at exactly 10:47 a.m., 1 hour after Mark had laughed at my resignation. Subject: Farewell and thank you, dear Redwood team. After 6 remarkable years, I've decided to pursue new opportunities. My last day will be 2 weeks from today. Working at Redwood has been an education in how companies really operate. The gap between what we project and what we practice. Between our public statements and private realities. I've learned that success often depends on whose name appears on the work rather than who actually did it. I'm grateful for the chance to contribute to projects that shaped Redwood's trajectory, even when that contribution went unrecognized. Special thanks to our clients who've placed their trust in us despite the challenges they don't yet fully understand. To those who come after me, document everything, trust carefully, and remember that integrity is worth more than any position. I wish Redwood all the success it deserves. Best regards, Emily Carter. The beauty was in its ambiguity. To most employees, it would read as slightly bitter but professional. But to anyone looking closer, investigators, journalists, clients who might Google the company, it was a roadmap of red flags. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with texts from colleagues. Everything okay? What happened? That email seemed loaded. I responded to none of them. Let them wonder. Let the questions percolate through the office like coffee through a filter. Phase 2 began at 11:15 a.m. From my personal laptop, in a coffee shop miles from the office, I opened my secure email account. 3 messages. already drafted, waiting for their moment. The first went to Sarah Brennan at the Denver Post. The subject line, Redwood Dynamics, the tech company built on fraud. Attached were 43 documents showing inflated user metrics, falsified retention rates, and emails where Mark explicitly instructed the CFO to make the numbers work for investor presentations. I included the audio recording of Mark laughing at my resignation, his voice dripping with contempt as he called me a support specialist with delusions of grandeur. The second went to David Park at Titan Ventures. David had invested $30 million in Redwood based on numbers that were, to put it charitably, creative fiction. The attached spreadsheets showed the real data alongside what had been presented. The discrepancies weren't subtle. We'd claimed 2 million active users when we had barely 400,000. Our industry-leading retention rate of 94% was actually closer to 31%. The email ended with a simple question. Did you know your due diligence team was shown fabricated data? The third went to Tom Garrison, though this was just confirmation of what we'd already discussed. As mentioned, I've submitted my resignation. Per our contract terms, you may want to review your options regarding the service agreement. Attached is documentation regarding the security vulnerabilities in the system your aerospace data runs through. Vulnerabilities Redwood has known about for 18 months without disclosure. Each email ended with the same postscript. Additional documentation available upon request. Then I waited. 20 minutes. 30. At 11:52 a.m., my phone rang. Sarah Brennan. Emily, this is... Jesus Christ, is this real? Every document is authentic, every email verified, every claim supported by evidence. Can we meet? Now. Corner of 16th and California. The Starbucks. 1 hour. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with clear sightlines. Sarah came in looking like she'd won the lottery, which, for an investigative journalist, she had. I handed her a flash drive containing everything. Contract violations, employment law breaches, the sexual harassment settlements with their illegal NDAs, recordings of meetings where Mark and his executive team discussed managing out female employees. This is 18 months of investigation handed to me on a platter, Sarah said, scrolling through files on her laptop. Why now? He laughed when I resigned, called it a joke, said I'd never leave because I need them. I sipped my coffee. He's about to learn who really needed whom. When can I publish? I'm giving you a head start, but others have the information too. I'd move fast. Sarah was already typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. My editor is going to lose his mind. This is Theranos-level fraud. But local. At 2:30 p.m., the first domino fell. Tom Garrison sent a formal notice to Redwood's legal department. Immediate contract termination based on breach of security protocols and the key person clause. $12 million in annual revenue, gone in a single PDF. At 3:15 p.m., David Park called an emergency meeting of Titan Ventures board. By 3:45 p.m., they'd issued a formal demand for a forensic audit of Redwood's books. At 4 p.m., 3 more clients who'd been copied on Garrison's termination notice requested emergency meetings with Redwood's leadership. At 4:47 p.m., Mark finally noticed something was wrong. His assistant knocked on my door. I was still technically employed, still sitting in my office, still playing the part of the dedicated employee serving out her notice period. Mark wants to see you, now. I took my time walking to his office. He was on the phone when I arrived, his face red, sweat beading on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. I don't care what Garrison says. The contract is ironclad. They can't just... He saw me and hung up abruptly. What did you do? I sent a farewell email to the team. Was there a problem with it? Don't play dumb. Garrison just pulled out. Park is demanding an audit. What did you do? I tilted my head, feigning confusion. I'm not sure what you mean. I've been in my office all day, transitioning my projects as requested, although... I paused, as if just remembering something. I did update my LinkedIn to show I'm leaving. Maybe clients saw that? You know how important relationships are in this business. His hands clenched into fists. Fix this. Whatever you did, undo it. I'm not sure there's anything to fix, Mark. After all, I'm just support staff. Remember, surely someone with delusions of grandeur couldn't impact anything important. The recognition dawned in his eyes, the understanding that he'd catastrophically underestimated me. But it was too late. The chess pieces were already in motion, and he was playing checkers. Get out, he said quietly. Of course, I'll be in my office if you need any support. I walked back to my office and watched the sun set over Denver, knowing that by sunrise, Mark's empire would be ash. The first move was complete. In 18 hours, the rest would follow. By 6 a.m. Wednesday, Sarah Brennan's article was live on the Denver Post's website. The headline screamed across my phone screen, "Redwood Dynamics accused of massive investor fraud, security cover-ups." The story was picked up by TechCrunch within an hour. By 7 a.m., it was trending on Twitter. I sat in my favorite coffee shop on Larimer Street, watching the destruction unfold on multiple screens. My laptop showed Redwood's internal Slack exploding with panic. My phone buzzed with Google alerts. The tablet displayed the company's stock price in real time. Private company valuations were plummeting based on comparable public tech firms. Sarah had done her job brilliantly. The article led with the security vulnerability that endangered aerospace data, then dove into the falsified metrics, the toxic culture, and included choice quotes from Mark's emails calling investors idiots with money. She'd even embedded the audio of Mark laughing at my resignation, though she'd protected my identity as a senior female executive who recently resigned. At 7:23 a.m., CNBC picked up the story. The morning anchor looked appropriately grave. Breaking news from Denver's tech scene, where Redwood Dynamics, a prominent enterprise software company, faces allegations of systematic fraud. My phone rang. It was Amy from HR, her voice shaking. "Emily, have you seen?" "I'm aware of the news article, yes." "Mark's called an all-hands at 8, mandatory. He says anyone who doesn't show is fired." "I submitted my resignation yesterday." "Amy, I don't think that applies to me. He specifically said everyone, especially you." I almost felt sorry for her. Amy was one of the good ones, trapped in a system she couldn't change. "I'll dial in remotely." The all-hands was a masterclass in delusion. Mark stood at the podium in the main conference room, his usual swagger replaced by barely controlled rage. Even through the video feed, I could see his hands trembling. "This is a hit piece," he declared. "Completely fabricated by a disgruntled former employee and a journalist with an agenda. We will be pursuing legal action against everyone involved." Someone off camera asked about the Garrison contract. Mark's jaw tightened. "A temporary setback. They'll be back once we clear this up." Another voice. "What about the investor audit?" "Standard procedure. We welcome the opportunity to prove our numbers are solid." Lie after lie, each one digging the hole deeper. I watched employees exchange glances, the doubt spreading like a virus through the room. Several people were already on their phones, probably updating resumes. At 8:45 a.m., the SEC announced a formal investigation into Redwood Dynamics. At 9:15 a.m., 3 more major clients terminated their contracts, citing breach of trust and security concerns. At 9:32 a.m., the CTO, Raymond Chen, submitted his resignation effective immediately, not wanting his name associated with the security cover-up. At 10 a.m., local news vans appeared outside Redwood's building. By noon, the employee exodus had begun. The development team lead walked out first, followed by half the engineering department. They streamed past the news cameras, some stopping to share their own stories of discrimination and mismanagement. The Slack channels turned into digital riots, years of suppressed frustration pouring out in bitter farewells and accusations. I moved from the coffee shop to a bar, ordering a whiskey despite the early hour. The bartender had the news on. Redwood was the lead story on local channels. They'd found former employees willing to go on record. Anna, the accountant who'd been fired after reporting harassment, looked directly into the camera and said, "This has been a long time coming. That company destroys people, especially women." At 2 p.m., Mark tried damage control with a press conference. It was a disaster. He stood behind a podium in the lobby, flanked by what remained of his executive team, notably missing Jim Harrison, who'd apparently called in sick. Mark's prepared statement was professional enough. All denial and legal threats, but the questions destroyed him. "Mr. Halstead, how do you respond to the audio recording of you calling a female executive support staff with delusions of grandeur? Can you explain the discrepancy between reported and actual user numbers? Is it true you've been hiding a critical security vulnerability from aerospace clients?" His answers were evasive, his composure cracking with each question. When a reporter asked about the mass resignations happening that very moment, Mark snapped, "This is a witch hunt. One bitter woman couldn't handle the pressure of corporate life and decided to burn it all down. We'll rebuild, and we'll be stronger, without the weak links." That soundbite would play on every news outlet for the next 12 hours. One bitter woman. The mask had slipped, and everyone saw the real Mark Halstead. By 4 p.m., the board called an emergency meeting. By 5 p.m., rumors were circulating that they were discussing Mark's immediate removal. At 6 p.m., Redwood's biggest competitor, Nexus Systems, issued a press release announcing they would honor any Redwood client contracts at a significant discount, effectively poaching the remaining customers. The Redwood dynamics that had existed 24 hours ago was dead. The building still stood. The logo still gleamed in the lobby. But the company itself, the contracts, the reputation, the trust that made business possible, had evaporated like morning mist. I finished my third whiskey as the evening news ran a segment titled "The Fastest Corporate Collapse in Denver History." They interviewed a business professor from DU who called it a case study in how toxic leadership and fraudulent practices can destroy a company overnight when exposed. My phone had been silent for hours, but at 7 p.m., a text came through from Jim Harrison. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed hundreds of jobs." I typed back, "No, Jim. Mark destroyed them when he built a company on lies and abuse. I just turned on the lights." Then I blocked his number, paid my tab, and walked out into the Denver evening. The city looked exactly the same as it had yesterday. But everything had changed. Somewhere across town, Mark was watching his life's work crumble. His investors were calling their lawyers, his employees were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. And I was just getting started, because the SEC investigation would need witnesses, and I had so much more to share. The call came at 8:47 p.m. I was back in my apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below. When Mark's name appeared on my phone screen, I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Emily." His voice was different now, raw, desperate, stripped of its usual arrogance. "Mark, you've made your point. Whatever you wanted, you got it. The board is meeting tonight to discuss my termination." "Is that what you wanted to hear?" I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us like a taut wire. "I'm calling to negotiate. What will it take to make this stop? To call off the reporters, the SEC, whoever else you've contacted?" "You think this is a negotiation?" "Everything's a negotiation. Name your price. Money, equity, a public apology. I'll give you whatever you want." I almost laughed. Even now, drowning in consequences, he thought he could buy his way out. "Mark, do you remember what you said when I resigned? You called it a joke." I misspoke. I was having a bad morning. You can't destroy an entire company over one comment. One comment? Now I did laugh, short and sharp. "Mark, that comment was just the period at the end of a very long sentence. 6 years of systematic discrimination, stolen ideas, buried harassment claims, fraudulent numbers, security vulnerabilities that put national defense data at risk. That's not... I have recordings, Mark, not just of yesterday, but dozens of meetings where you explicitly discussed deceiving investors, covering up problems, and managing out female employees. The SEC will find them fascinating. His breathing grew ragged. What do you want, Emily? Just tell me what you want. I wanted to do my job and be recognized for it. I wanted to work in a company that valued competence over chromosomes. I wanted you to build something real instead of a house of cards. I can change. The company can change. We'll bring you back, make you co-o. Real power, real recognition. You still don't get it, do you? There is no company to come back to. Garrison's gone. Nexus took Peterson Industries and Bramwell Tech this afternoon. David Park is demanding immediate repayment of Titan's investment. Your CFO resigned an hour ago rather than face fraud charges. How do you know about? Because unlike you, Mark, I pay attention. I build relationships. I earn loyalty. Every person you stepped on, dismissed, or humiliated remembers. And today, they're all talking to me. A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, almost broken. This was planned. All of it. You planned to destroy everything. No, Mark. You destroyed everything the day you decided that bullying and fraud were acceptable business strategies. I just documented it. The employees, innocent people will lose their jobs because of you. Because of me, or because you built a company that couldn't survive transparency? The good employees will land on their feet. Several already have offers from Nexus. The ones who enabled you? They'll get what they deserve. You're vindictive. I'm thorough. Europe. He caught himself, but I could hear the slur he'd swallowed. Careful, Mark. You're being recorded. The silence was deafening. When he spoke again, it was barely a whisper. You recorded this call? Every call, Mark. Every interaction since you laughed at my resignation. Your lawyers will probably tell you that Colorado is a one-party consent state, all admissible. You destroyed me. No, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it happen. I could have been better. Given time, I could have changed things. You had 6 years. You had hundreds of opportunities to be better. You chose this path with every stolen idea, every dismissed complaint, every fraudulent report. So this is revenge. This is consequences. Something you've never had to face before. His voice turned ugly, the mask finally completely gone. You'll never work in tech again. I'll make sure of it. Everyone will know you're the woman who destroyed Redwood. Remember when you called my resignation a joke? Who's laughing now? Mark? The silence stretched for 10 seconds before he spoke, his voice hollow. You are. No. Mark, I'm not laughing. This isn't funny. It's just necessary. Goodbye. Wait. I hung up. Then I blocked his number, deleted his contact, and poured myself another whiskey. On my laptop, the news coverage continued. Redwood Dynamics CEO Mark Halstead refused to comment on resignation rumors. The board had made their decision. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Brennan. Board just confirmed Halstead is out, effective immediately. You gave me the story of the year. I raised my glass to the window, to the city beyond, to every woman who'd been told she was just support. The king had fallen. The castle had crumbled. And I hadn't even had to raise my voice. Outside, Denver glittered in the darkness, unaware and uncaring about the corporate drama that had unfolded in its heart. But in offices across the city, other women were watching, taking notes, understanding that toxic leadership could be toppled if you were patient, thorough, and absolutely ruthless when the moment came. I thought Mark would call again, perhaps from another number, but he didn't. He was probably with his lawyers now, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. But there was nothing left to salvage. In less than 24 hours, he'd gone from CEO of a rising tech company to a cautionary tale about hubris and harassment. The punchline had been delivered. The joke was over. Thursday morning arrived with devastating finality for Redwood Dynamics. The Denver Post's follow-up headline read, Redwood Dynamics stock valuation plummets 87% as federal investigation expands. By 9 a.m., The building that had housed 300 employees was down to fewer than 50. Mostly legal and finance teams trying to manage the implosion. I watched from across the street, sitting in the same coffee shop where I'd drafted my resignation letter weeks ago. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Redwood's lobby, I could see the security guards turning away employees. The board had suspended operations pending investigation. Some stood outside in confusion, others in tears, many on their phones desperately calling recruiters. The local NBC affiliate was doing a live broadcast from the sidewalk. The reporter, a young woman who looked genuinely shocked by the story's scope, was interviewing former employees. In just 24 hours, Redwood Dynamics has gone from a $40 million company to essentially worthless. The FBI has now joined the SEC investigation, particularly interested in the national security implications of hidden vulnerabilities in aerospace contractor systems. My phone buzzed with updates from former colleagues. The CFO had been arrested at the airport trying to leave for Costa Rica. Jim Harrison was cooperating with investigators, throwing Mark under every available bus. The board had filed for emergency bankruptcy protection, hoping to shield themselves from the tsunami of lawsuits already being prepared. At 10 a.m., Mark's personal assets were frozen by court order. His Tesla, his country club membership, his investment accounts, all locked pending investigation. Someone had leaked a photo of him being escorted from his mansion by federal agents. Not arrested, but requested to assist with inquiries. His face in the photo was gray, hollow, aged a decade overnight. By noon, the complete collapse was official. Redwood Dynamics ceased to exist as a functioning entity. The website went dark. The phone lines were disconnected. The building management company posted an eviction notice for non-payment, apparently. The company's accounts had been frozen so thoroughly that even basic bills couldn't be paid. Sarah Brennan published her second article, The Woman Who Toppled a Tech Tyrant, inside the 24-hour takedown of Redwood Dynamics. She'd kept my name out of it, referring to me only as a senior female executive with extensive documentation of corporate malfeasance. But she painted the picture clearly: years of systematic abuse, discrimination, and fraud, all meticulously documented by someone Mark had dismissed as merely support staff. The tech community's response was swift and brutal. LinkedIn was flooded with posts from industry leaders distancing themselves from Mark and Redwood. We never really trusted their numbers, claimed CEOs who'd been singing Redwood's praises just days before. The culture problems were an open secret, wrote VCs who'd never raised a concern during board meetings. At 2 p.m., something unexpected happened. A group of women who'd formerly worked at Redwood organized an impromptu gathering in the park across from the building. There were about 30 of them. Some I recognized, many I didn't. They weren't protesting or celebrating, just standing together, witnessing the end of something that had hurt them all in different ways. Anna, the accountant who'd been fired for reporting harassment, saw me watching from the coffee shop and waved me over. I hesitated, then joined them. "We wanted to see it end," she said simply. "All of us who were pushed out, silenced, erased. We needed to see that it actually ended." Jennifer from development was there, the one who'd been passed over for promotion 5 times. "Whoever leaked all that information to the press," she said, looking directly at me. "They're a hero. They did what none of us could do alone." I said nothing, just nodded. They knew. Maybe not the details, but they knew. By 3 p.m., the gathering had grown. Male employees who'd witnessed the discrimination but felt powerless to stop it. Clients who'd suspected something was wrong but couldn't prove it. Even a few investors who'd lost millions but seemed almost relieved to know the truth. Someone had brought champagne, not expensive stuff, just grocery store sparkling wine in plastic cups. We toasted to nothing in particular, not celebrating destruction, just acknowledging an ending. The building loomed across the street, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun, looking exactly as it had yesterday, but meaning something entirely different. The FBI agents came and went, carrying boxes of evidence. The Redwood logo was already being removed from the lobby, leaving ghost letters on the marble where it had been. By tomorrow, it would be like the company had never existed at all. At 4 p.m., Mark's lawyer held a press conference. Mark himself was nowhere to be seen. The lawyer, a sharp-suited man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, read a prepared statement. Mr. Halstead maintains his innocence and looks forward to clearing his name. He had no knowledge of any fraudulent activities and trusted his executive team to maintain proper standards. The journalists weren't buying it. What about the recordings of Mr. Halstead explicitly discussing falsifying investor reports? No comment at this time. What about the discrimination allegations? Mr. Halstead denies all allegations of discrimination. Where is Mr. Halstead now? My client is cooperating fully with authorities. The lawyer fled after 5 minutes, pursued by questions he couldn't answer. By evening, Redwood Dynamics was trending nationally. Revenge in 24 hours became a rallying cry for employees everywhere who'd been mistreated by toxic bosses. The story had transcended Denver, becoming a symbol of something larger. The end of an era where people like Mark could build empires on the backs of those they despised. I walked home as the sun set, my phone silent for the first time in 48 hours. Behind me, the Redwood building stood empty. A $30 million tombstone for a company that had collapsed in less time than it took to process a direct deposit. The joke had found its punchline. The laughter had died. And in the silence that followed, something that might have been justice settled over Denver like the first snow of winter. 3 months later. I sat in a small bar on the outskirts of Denver, the kind of place where nobody knew your name and nobody cared. The television above the bar was tuned to the financial news. Mark Halstead's trial was set to begin next week. Federal fraud charges, securities violations, and conspiracy to deceive investors. His lawyers were pushing for a plea deal. But the prosecutors smelled blood in the water. The bartender, an older woman with knowing eyes, set down my whiskey without being asked. I'd become something of a regular here, coming in once a week to sit quietly and watch the news cycle finally move on from Redwood's spectacular collapse. You following that trial? She asked, nodding at the screen. Peripherally. Guy had it coming, from what I hear. Built his whole company on lies and stepping on people. I took a sip of whiskey. So they say. She studied me for a moment, then moved on to another customer. She didn't know who I was, and I preferred it that way. Emily Carter had effectively disappeared after Redwood's collapse. I'd turned down every interview request, ignored the book deal offers, deleted LinkedIn. The world knew a senior female executive had brought down Mark Halstead, but my name had stayed out of it. I'd spent the months since then doing consulting work, helping companies build better cultures, implement real accountability. It paid well, and more importantly, it felt clean. Every toxic executive I helped remove, every discriminatory system I helped dismantle, was another small victory. The news shifted to other stories. Redwood Dynamics was old news now, just another cautionary tale in the long history of corporate hubris. The building had been leased by a different company, one that promised transparency and equality in their mission statement. Whether they'd deliver was another question entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from Anna, the accountant who'd been fired for reporting harassment. She'd landed at a nonprofit, doing meaningful work for less money but infinitely more respect. Saw the news about Mark's trial. Drinks to celebrate when he's sentenced? Maybe, I replied. The truth was, I didn't feel like celebrating. There was no joy in destruction, even necessary destruction. I'd done what needed to be done, but it hadn't brought the satisfaction I'd expected, just a hollow kind of peace, like the silence after a storm. Jim Harrison had avoided prosecution by turning state's evidence. He'd relocated to Austin, trying to rebuild his career. The other executives had scattered like roaches when the lights came on. Some found new positions, their role in Redwood's fraud conveniently forgotten. Others weren't so lucky. The industry had a long memory for certain kinds of failure. As for the employees, most had landed on their feet. Nexus Systems had hired a significant number, as had other competitors eager to scoop up talent. The good ones, the ones who'd done real work despite the toxic culture, were thriving. I kept loose tabs on them through the professional grapevine, pleased to see them succeeding in healthier environments. The bartender had turned the channel to a basketball game. I finished my whiskey and left cash on the bar, adding a generous tip. Outside, Denver's evening air was crisp, carrying the promise of winter. The city had moved on, as cities always do, absorbing the scandal and continuing forward. I walked past the building that had housed Redwood Dynamics. The new company's logo gleamed where Mark's had once been. Through the windows, I could see people working late. But the energy seemed different, collaborative rather than oppressive. Maybe they'd learned from Redwood's mistakes. Maybe not. Time would tell. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Ms. Carter, this is Rebecca Phillips from the SEC. We wanted to thank you again for your cooperation in the investigation. Your documentation was instrumental in building our case. Just doing what was necessary. Well, between you and me, what you did was extraordinary. Mark Halstead is looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted on all counts. Good. Can I ask you something off the record? Do you regret it? Bringing down the whole company? I thought about it as I walked, the city lights blurring past. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that no one stopped him sooner. But regret what I did? No. He thought my resignation was a joke. The punchline came faster than he ever expected. Rebecca laughed softly. Well, nobody's laughing at you now. No, I agreed. They're not. After we hung up, I stood on the street corner, watching the city pulse with life. Somewhere, another Emily was probably sitting in her office, documenting discrimination, gathering evidence, waiting for her moment. Somewhere, another Mark was laughing at someone he considered beneath him, never imagining that his empire could fall in a single day. I raised an imaginary glass to that unknown Emily. Your time will come, I thought. And when it does, don't hesitate, don't show mercy, and whatever you do, don't let them see you coming until it's too late. The whiskey warmed my chest as I walked home. In my apartment, I opened my laptop and looked at the consulting requests that had come in that week. 3 companies wanting culture audits, 2 wanting help with accountability systems, 1 specifically asking for help dealing with a toxic executive. I accepted them all. Mark Halstead had called my resignation a joke. But I'd had the last laugh, even if I'd never actually laughed at all. The punchline hadn't been funny. It had just been necessary. And in the end, that was enough. He thought my resignation was a joke. The punchline came faster than he ever expected. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and justice served cold. If you're listening to this tale of Emily's triumph over toxic leadership, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this story of how one woman's documentation brought down an empire in 24 hours, please subscribe to the channel for more revenge stories that will leave you speechless. Share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed workplace injustice? What did you think of Emily's calculated revenge? Let me know in the comments below.